Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler, and this is Seller Labs going live. I'm here with Brandon Checketts, co-founder and CEO of Seller Labs. And today we're going to be talking about the recent changes with the buyer-seller opt-out. It's been about a month since it's happened, and so things are finally starting to settle down a little bit. So we're going to kind of talk through everything and answer some of your questions if you have any. But let's first talk about Brandon, so you can kind of know who we are and why we're talking about this even. So Brandon, tell us about yourself and why you're kind of an authority in this matter.
Yeah, so those of you who haven't seen me before, I think I try and do these podcasts every once in a while with Jeff on board, but I'm the founder of Seller Labs. I actually created the very initial version of Feedback Genius back in around 2013. So Feedback Genius has been in my blood for quite a while now. Obviously, Seller Labs has gone on to do lots of other things, and we're involved kind of in other stuff besides just Feedback Genius now. We're spending a lot of time on advertising, on scope, on other products, but still Feedback Genius is sort of one of our core features, one of our core products. And so I think Feedback Genius sends around a million messages a day. So we're very much in the middle of all this Amazon buyer-seller messaging stuff. And I dare say Feedback Genius is probably the largest provider of Amazon automated email messages as well. So we got quite a bit of good data to go off of when we're talking about, especially anything around the buyer-seller messaging system.
Awesome, thanks, Brandon. And so tell me, where did this all begin? When did this start? What does the buyer-seller opt-out mean? Can you give us a little bit more history to this?
Yeah, sure. So I think if you followed our blog post and our newsletters, we sort of give you these updates as they happen. But if you go back around the end of March, I think it was about March 27th, Amazon introduced this thing called their opt-out messages. Created quite a lot of havoc, actually, those first few days because Amazon, the messaging that they had in there, people were just getting a bunch of these messages saying that your message couldn't be delivered to a buyer. And that caused a lot of confusion. A lot of sellers upset with it because they thought it was going to hurt their metrics. A lot of messages getting bounced kind of inappropriately because they're critical messages that needed to go through. And so, towards the end of March, I think about the March 31st or April 1st, Amazon actually backed out these changes that they made originally. It's causing probably such a headache. Obviously, we were seeing a lot of questions about it, but I can only imagine what it was caused inside the Seller Central support and all the stuff that their team goes through. I imagine it changed quite a bit it added quite a load of work to their side. And so they quickly backed out that first round of changes.
Yeah, because it was originally very strongly worded, wasn't it? The responses they were giving to sellers. Correct?
Yeah, I have some of those original emails saved, and it was they used the sentences in there like your account could be suspended and all these pretty strongly worded things that were, kind of overstating the importance of it or the adding drama to it, where it was really not that big a deal, but it added a lot of confusion in the marketplace. So I think they realized that after a few days and then turned it back off just to try and regroup and figure out how to make it work better and how to improve their messaging around it.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. That's a great kind of background to it. And so I'm kind of getting some questions here if this is working in the stream. So if everyone could just hit the thumbs up or let me know if it's working real quick. We just want to make sure that everyone can get this good information. In the meantime, so they backed it back down, and now about a month ago they brought it back out. So what does that kind of what does that mean now? It looks like it's kind of here to stay. Tell us a little bit about that, Brandon.
Yeah, so I guess what we saw there mainly was that, Amazon, they had a lot of weirdness going on originally, confusion in the marketplace. And so they sort of backed those out. And then about a month ago, I think my date on that was, what I have down, about May 15th, May 17th, somewhere in there. They turned it back on, this time with better communication about there. It wasn't as confusing, I don't think. Their messaging around it was better. They explained it more clearly. I think people had already seen it once, and so it wasn't as dramatic this time around. But it looks like they've kind of figured it out. It's probably what we got is here to stay. They more clearly stated some of the requirements around it and everything. So I think that it's much more clear around this time around. I think it's here to stay now. We've been dealing with it and understanding what that means internally with Feedback Genius, and they're starting to share out like this is going to be a thing for a while now. And so we're going to, that's why I wanted to get together today, is to talk more about, like, we kind of understand what's going on. So let's make sure that everybody understands it and share what we know about it as well.
So what changes have been made for sellers now?
All right.
Is it staying? Let's get right into it.
Sure. So you're breaking up a little bit. I'm seeing some comments about you're breaking up, so I'll kind of try and restate, I think, what you're asking. So I think your question is like, what's changed and what's the current state of things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's the case.
Okay, yeah. So Amazon's clearly stated in pretty definitive terms what they've defined as critical emails and non-critical emails. And so I think we'll link to some of those resources on the Seller Central site for the things that Amazon deems are critical. Specifically, those are things they enumerate them out. They say they're product customization questions. So if you're selling a handmade product or something that needs customization, those are critical emails in order to be delivered. Emails delivered with having to do with scheduling. So if you attempted delivery, or if the carrier attempted to deliver something and couldn't for whatever reason, emails related to that are still deemed critical, as well as things if you're selling stuff that shipped like via freight or something like that, and you need to communicate with the customer to figure out more details about their shipping address. Those are all still critical. So those are all the kind of things that Amazon deems as critical emails, and they provided a way to still send those and to bypass essentially this opt-out that sellers have. The non-critical ones are the things like requests for feedback. So it says requests for feedback or reviews, order, shipment, or delivery confirmations, or proactive customer service, things like product manuals, tips, and suggestions. So those are the things that are not critical. Which falls a lot into what Feedback Genius is used for. And so those are the things that are subject to this opt-out policy. And then Amazon obviously wants to make sure that the buyers receive the critical messages and have the choice on the non-critical messages.
So let me play devil's advocate here for a second, Brandon. If they're non-critical emails, does that mean that we're no longer allowed to send them?
No, I mean, I think in several places, Amazon's, and I've to share a couple places where Amazon specifically says, like, the buyer-seller messaging system is intended to help buyers and sellers communicate. One of the purposes is that it facilitates communication, and that makes it so the buyers are less likely to have a bad experience. There's definitely we see a lot of people using the buyer-seller messaging system in their emails that they use through Feedback Genius are there to help the customer understand how to use the product, how to fend off negative reviews. In fact, the very, very original use case for which I wrote Feedback Genius a long time ago was specifically to eliminate what was resulting in a lot of bad buyer experiences as negative feedback. So that's really the reason for it. And so those are still very valid use cases for it. And then what else was I going to touch on with that? We see a lot of people using it with that, and then also Amazon says there's also another page on Seller Central that talks about managing your feedback and improving your feedback rating. And inside that page, they mention, like, if you don't get a lot of feedback, like, you can politely ask customers to leave a review for you. And so it's still, obviously, Feedback Genius still works really, really well to achieve all those goals.
Awesome, thanks, Brandon. So Lisa asks, is there a way, should we send them all day long, but they just bounce back? So what percentage of shoppers have we seen overall have opted out of receiving these messages, these non-critical messages?
Yeah, so what we've seen, I think, is what Amazon did is they kind of turned on the opt-out and kind of, what do you say, they turned it on for segments of buyers at a time. I think it's turned on for pretty much everybody now. But we saw it kind of come up, and it sort of, originally we're seeing a few messages from a few customers, and then it turned on for more customers. I think what we've seen is, like, it's pretty much leveled out. Like, it's probably turned on for all Amazon buyers at this point. All the ones that they were going to turn it on for has been enabled. And so we're seeing about somewhere in the range of 10 to 20%, depending on what seller we're talking to. About 10 to 20% of their messages are getting bounced back because buyers had opted out. And that varies by category and by seller, as I mentioned, depending on what type of people are buying your products. But it's a significant amount, but it's not a majority by any means. And so we're seeing a little bit lower, a little bit higher bounce rates, but actually the number of click-throughs we're seeing and the number of email deliveries that we're seeing are fairly constant. So they've declined by a couple percent, but not a lot. So it seems to me what's happening is the people that were not reading the emails and were not likely to click on your links are the ones who are opting out of that. And so the net effect is that the sellers are still getting a lot of click-throughs on those people that would have clicked through anyway.
And we have a good question from John here. John asks, do you suspect that all buyers will eventually opt out?
No, not at all. I think there's lots of good reasons. I don't think people are opted out by default. I think that the sellers have to go in and manually turn it off. I think Amazon points people to that page whenever a buyer questions it. But there's a lot of good information that still flows through there, and I think a lot of buyers realize that as well, that they're missing out on the communication, especially if a buyer wants to reach out and the seller can explain that they sent that. I think the buyers are a lot of times they don't know what they don't know. So if we can point out why it's good for them, a lot of people are still seeing lots of good use out of that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great answer to that. And so Don asked, we touched on this already, but let's reiterate on it again. The difference between critical and non-critical email. Don says, when we reply to a customer, that should be deemed critical. And I think in that case, that's another one of those, maybe since it wasn't outlined in that list, that is still considered critical. If a buyer contacts you and you reply to them, that's certainly critical, and that's not subject to these messages. What Amazon is finding, the ones that Amazon is opting people out of, is where you send the email to a customer before they send you a message. Those are what they're considering unsolicited, meaning that if the buyer contacted you first and then you replied to it, that doesn't seem to be subject to these opt-out rules. But if you just send a message to the buyer before they've sent you anything, that's the ones that are sort of subject that they're running through this filter. That's a great answer. So we've talked about the percentages that we've seen as far as people opting out, but have we seen overall that it affects the usefulness of Feedback Genius? As far as open rates and click-through rates, and is it overall affecting that very much?
Yeah, so we've seen a slight decline. So we pay attention to sort of system-wide. Pay attention, obviously, to the number of messages we send. We pay attention to the number of opens that we see on those messages and the number of click-throughs. And so we've not seen significant declines in the percentage of in the percentage of click-throughs and opens that we've seen. We've seen those go down by a couple of percent, maybe as high as 5%, kind of system-wide. But not really as drastic as some people, like I said, in the 10 to 20% range is sort of the buyer opt-outs that we're seeing. And so it's a smaller portion of that is what people are actually the net effect of what we're seeing is after all that doesn't make a huge impact, maybe a slight impact.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying on that one a little bit. So if it's not affecting that very much, is it overall a positive or a negative thing for sellers being able to opt out?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say there's a couple ways of viewing this. Obviously, it's made the feedback messages a little bit less valuable because they're not going out to some of the customers, and we're seeing a slight decline in some of those. But the thing I guess I continue to pay attention to is Amazon's always going to be doing what's best for the and more more traffic there, more trust, more confidence in the whole system, which is good for sellers. And also what we're seeing is the sellers who have actually put really a lot thought into their messages that have more creative and more original content, maybe than just the defaults, than what Feedback Genius provides. Like the more sort of creative and the more your brand comes through in here, the less opt-outs we see, just kind of generally speaking, from those buyers as well.
Awesome, thanks. So what is Feedback Genius? What are we here at Seller Labs doing with Feedback Genius to help the emails that are bouncing back, to help make sure that we don't send emails to shoppers who have opted out?
Yeah, we definitely want to touch on a few things that we've done within the realm of Feedback Genius to help. With this change is fairly significant. What we had is we had been building and had rolled out internally a feature we call a global blacklist. Essentially, what that means is if a buyer had opted out of, maybe if you and I were both selling things on Amazon and the buyer had opted out to both of our seller accounts individually, then internally we would add them to what we call a global blacklist, meaning that this particular shopper is somebody who was likely to opt out of future ones as well. And so we had built that already internally. We just sort of exposed a new method for adding people to that global blacklist. So what you can do is inside of Feedback Genius, you can click on the blacklist link up at the top, and then there's a little question mark that appears up in the top of that. If you click on that, it provides in there a little email address that goes to something at feedbackgenius.com. And if you can go into your email client and set it up to forward all those emails that look like they're the blacklist, that say like your email couldn't be delivered to a buyer or whatever the content of those is, you set a filter up, and we've got pretty good instructions on how to do this in Gmail and a couple systems. You set it up to find all those messages and forward them into that Feedback Genius email. And what it does is that shortcuts the system. And so whenever we receive one of those messages that we can identify as one of the opt-out emails, then we actually globally blacklist that user across all of our user accounts. So now if Tyler, for example, sold something and a user blocked and Tyler was using Feedback Genius, tried to send that user a message and they got one of those bounce backs, if Tyler had set up his email stuff properly and to go back into Feedback Genius, when I as a different seller would go to send that same customer another email message, it'll identify inside Feedback Genius, inside our global blacklist, that he's opted out of everything and not send them that email message to begin with. Did I explain that clearly, Tyler? That's a little confusing route.
Yeah, I think so. I think just to put it succinctly again, maybe just wording it a different way. The global blacklist just says anytime that a seller gets an email and lets us know using Feedback Genius that they are opted out, we will no longer send messages to that buyer from any other seller. So I can't. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. The concept is once we've identified a buyer is on the Amazon's blacklist, then we're going to try and not send any messages to them from any seller using Feedback Genius.
Right, and I'm posting in the comments right now the blog post that explains how to do that. You can see the link there as well. 1 second. Yeah,
perfect. I think we've got instructions there for Gmail, and I think we've got some written for Yahoo and whatever email client you might be using. So it does differ a little bit on how you set up those forwarding functionality depending on what email client you're using. But in general, it's just going to be set up a filter for those particular messages and then forward it to that email address that's visible inside your Feedback Genius account, and that'll take care of it.
Indeed.
And of course, our support's around to help you, and they can help you identify if that's set up right and everything else, if you have any questions about it.
Indeed, of course. Anyone who has a question can always reach out to support at Seller Labs. So another question that we have here, let me see. Someone asked, is it default for new buyers to be opted out? And I think I'm going to speak first to this. I think that's something that we're still trying to figure out. It's they're trying different things maybe to see, try opting buyers out at first, or, I think it's something that's still very in the air. Brandon, you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I can tell you, I personally tried it about 2 weeks ago with a couple new accounts, and it seemed to be the way you can go in and check it from a buyer account. is you have to log into your Amazon buyer account and then go to your settings. And there's a thing under there, I think it's called communication preferences. And you have to dig quite a ways to try and find it. But from what I saw, the new accounts that I created as of about 2 weeks ago, it was not turned on by default. I see a couple of comments saying that they have tried it and saw that it was turned on by default. And so it's a little conflicting. I'm not sure. Is it or is it not? It kind of depends, I guess, on who you ask.
So Jim has a great question here, Brandon. He says, so no matter how well I might craft a great brand-oriented message, if the buyer opted out of one seller, he is automatically opted out of mine too. Is that always the case?
Yeah, so that's the way the system works on Amazon side, is that if a buyer opts out of, they call it buyer or seller communication. If they opt out of this seller communication, it opts out of all the sellers. So I guess it is kind of important overall for all of our users to try and have better messages, because it does help everybody. And so, like if a buyer opted out of seller communication, it's globally across all sellers.
Awesome. But with Feedback Genius, they're only added to the global blacklist when?
So they're added to the global blacklist inside Feedback Genius in a couple different ways. Number one of them is the one we just mentioned about if one of our sellers forwards us an email that says that the message tried to be delivered to a buyer, but the buyer had opted out. We do those, I think, after the first one of those we receive, we'll blacklist that buyer globally across all of our accounts. And then also, when users opt out of a particular seller inside Feedback Genius, it takes them to a link that says that they can opt out and not receive messages from this seller anymore. There's an additional link they can click in that case to opt out from all other messages from Feedback Genius. So that's the second way that we can do it. And then the third way is if we recognize the same buyer has opted out of multiple sellers inside Feedback Genius. I think it's 3 sellers is the trigger we use right now. It might be 2. I'd have to go back and look. But if they've opted out of multiple sellers, then we also add them to that blacklist as well.
Awesome.
So we're trying our best to obey what users desire, obeying what Amazon wants us to obey, because Amazon doesn't actually give us any good data around this. So we had to kind of make up our own system for doing it.
So here's a good question from Mike Murphy. He asks, I have a customized email for Feedback Genius with important tips on how to use the product. At the end of it, I have a product review link. Can I change the global settings to send my email to those who have opted out and not get in trouble with Amazon?
So I would say Amazon has some very specific reasons that you should opt out. So Amazon is it's actually a very convoluted way to sort of bypass this method. And they provide these are the 3 things that Amazon says are critical, which you can use this for. Product customization questions. Again, if you're selling like a handmade item or something that's personalized with somebody's name or something like that, those are critical emails. Delivery scheduling problems. So if there's an issue, you tried to deliver it and it failed, we couldn't find your address. And then issues with the shipping address, if they entered something that they couldn't interpret the shipping address. Those are the only emails for which you can use that sort of important designation and bypass the Amazon's opt-out list. All the other ones, including stuff like proactive customer service, requests for feedback, those are all have to fall and stay within the opt-out procedure. Now you can go through and choose to do that as a seller, but most likely Amazon's not going to take too kindly to that.
Right. So in Mike's case, it probably would be good to make sure that the content in his packaging and things like that are enough that to fill in those kind of things, that the tips that you're just giving there.
Yeah, so that's definitely. I mean, there's another set of rules possibly around what goes in the package, and there's a little bit of debate about whether you can put product review requests inside your box or packaging. We definitely see lots of people doing that. But that's sort of a separate area of discussion, I guess.
Awesome. So we had a question from Lulu, and we've kind of touched this already, so I'll just kind of hit it really quick. She asked, if I add a customer to the manual blacklist, to not receive emails from me, do they get added to the global blacklist as well? And kind of the answer to that is only if they've been added to multiple people's blacklists already, we'll add them to the global blacklist. Because obviously there's not a good experience that customers having from receiving emails. Amanda asked, so when we get a message that our first email to a buyer was blocked because they opted out, does Seller Labs send a second email if we have one set up to go to that buyer? And if so, does that count towards my email count and Feedback Genius?
Yeah, so that's where it's a good idea, and we'd really like to get people to make sure they forward those messages into Feedback Genius, because number one, that helps us build out a better picture of who's opted out of that across all Amazon customers. Number two, that'll prevent you from sending a second message to them and using that up in your accounts. And I know our support team is working on our development team is working on a way to account for those a little bit better. But definitely, like the main point I want to stress there is like definitely set up that forwarding of those messages into your Feedback Genius blacklist so that you don't send the second message there in that case, and then it's not counted towards it against the messages you're subscribed to in Feedback Genius.
Awesome. So Sharon asks, and I've seen this question a couple times, if we don't do anything, regardless to blacklisting with Feedback Genius, etc., after the first warning, are there any consequences for continuing to send the messages to these people that we know of right now?
No, Amazon's made it clear that essentially, like, they're just telling you that the message couldn't be delivered. The reason they kind of feel like they have to send you that message is just in case it was a critical message. Like they don't want to be on the hook for saying, "Hey, we just discarded it." So they're sending bounce back messages every time that a seller has opted out of something, and that's just kind of to cover their own thing to say, like, if in case it was critical, they gave you instructions on how to get that critical message through. But they basically realized there's no way for you to identify who those users are beforehand, and so there's no penalties for that. There's a couple of blog posts on the Seller Central forums and stuff that sort of indicate that as well. And I think some of our blog posts mentions those. I think Tyler's got that link to share later on if we want to point people to that as well.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and post that again. So there's there's a question about, one second, I can't see who it's by. There was a question about how to tell the percentage of their emails to their shoppers that are bouncing. How would you go about doing that, Brandon? So
we the best way I've seen to do that is to go log into your Seller Central account, click on the messaging tab up at the top, and then I have to switch from their new interface is terrible, by the way. So I always have to switch to their old interface, which I think is a lot better and a lot more intuitive. Switch to the old interface, which is like an option at the top of there, and then you can click on Sent Messages. And then on that Sent Messages tab, you can see all the messages that you sent to the buyers, either directly through your own emails to them or through Feedback Genius. And the ones that are bounced have a little exclamation point on it, and you can count those up. So the easiest way I've seen to do that is to change that to show 100 at a time and then count how many are on a page, and you'll probably see around 20 of them or so. Would be about 20%, just kind of roughly speaking.
Awesome. So let's check in briefly on. Talk about this a little bit. I know we have a lot of people tuning in. Overall, again, do you think this is a positive thing or a negative thing, or just something that's happened to sellers?
You're breaking up quite a bit for me, I think for others too. But I think your question was, overall, is this kind of a good thing or bad thing? Is that what you're asking?
I was asking to kind of touch on it again. Last time I answered that question.
Ooh, I couldn't interpret that. I don't know. So I think we kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. Good thing, bad thing. Obviously, it makes this Facebook Live have talked about, like, they spend a little bit of time, like a fair amount of time going through and customizing those messages, which buyers are not going to receive. Like, yeah, true, that does happen to That is going to happen a little bit. This is a thing that evidently, Amazon wants to do. Buyers have said they wanted to do it. So overall, it's catering to what buyers want. And so, you can't really say that's a bad thing in any way, shape, or form, but it does make your job as a seller a little bit less, a little bit more challenging, I guess. So it adds an extra layer to there. Overall, like feedback, sending the messages still is a great way to do it. Like, and I'll point out a couple messages or a couple of statistics that we kind of talk about globally. Like if you just leave Amazon to do everything and if you don't do anything and don't send any emails to customers, like the default rate for what we see for seller feedback is, somewhere in the 1% range. For product reviews, it's well under 1% range. But if you just send like a polite message to a seller asking them to review for a product or leave you seller feedback, like that jumps up to the 3% range, 5% range pretty easily. So it's a pretty drastic difference that it makes, and that the effect of that has gone down a little bit, but not a ton. So it still is super effective if you're trying to get more product reviews or more seller feedback. Just think about it though. The reason we kind of made Feedback Genius in the first place is because the people don't generally leave feedback unless they have a problem or complain. And so all we're doing is helping you to just ask politely for a feedback. I think best practice is probably to ask for it probably just once, maybe twice, to try and make sure that people aren't finding your emails spammy or offensive. But probably just try to make sure that your message is polite. Make sure that it's useful. Try to make sure that it's time to go out directly after they've received their product. That's actually one of the things Amazon says in their things is to ask for a polite review after the product has been received. And as far as I know, Feedback Genius is the only system that actually checks the tracking numbers and makes sure that the product was actually delivered first. So those are just some of the small things you can do. Again, a little bit less effective perhaps today than it was 3 months ago, but still super effective.
Awesome, Brandon. Thanks. Can you hear me a little bit better now? I changed my microphone.
It's a little bit all right, but you're still a bit choppy.
All right. So we have a question from Ed who asks, does anybody send customers emails outside of Amazon? And my answer to Ed on that would be if you're sending emails to Amazon customers outside of Amazon, then you're breaking Amazon's terms of service as far as that goes.
The best source of truth on this matter is just to Google or go into Amazon and into Seller Central and search inside their help pages, or just Google it. Search for Amazon prohibited seller activities. That's got a pretty good list of things that are prohibited, and it's pretty blatantly says you may not contact a user outside of Amazon to try to get them to buy something from you off Amazon. So that's it's pretty hard to get around that. So that's a tricky thing. Now it gets a little bit more gray and tricky if the buyer originated on your website or from your mailing list, and then you've got their email address to begin with, and then you push them over to Amazon and they bought from you. Then yeah, you can still, since you had their email address kind of natively from outside of Amazon, probably okay to keep emailing them if that's where your email address for them originated. But I would not go the route. I would avoid going the route of trying to reverse engineer people's email addresses so that you can market to the Amazon customers outside of Amazon.
Thanks, Brandon. We've got a great question here from John. And John asks, if we're at 10 to 20% now, do you think that this will increase over time, or what do you think that it'll kind of end up at and stabilize at?
I don't know. Really hard to predict the future on that one. I think, I don't know. Logic would seem to indicate it's probably going to creep up over time. It just depends, I guess, on what buyers do. I think there's probably some natural balance, I guess, between what sellers are using and what buyers expect. And I expect it probably gets some sort of equilibrium at some point where it kind of flattens out. That's my kind of expectation. I don't know if that happens or not, but essentially, I think there's some way to get some equilibrium in there where it kind of gets into balance and doesn't change a whole lot from day to day or from month to month.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that there's obviously going to be a lot of buzz about it up front now that, now that it's available. There's been a lot of buzz about it, but I think that over time it'll die down and become more normal as well. So it is one of those things that's very kind of tough to predict. We've got a question here from Kevin, and he says, I have 6,000 orders per month. Do I have to manually count them 100 at a time to see which ones are bouncing? And you can also check in your email. You should be getting the bounce emails for any ones that are not being delivered. Correct, Brandon?
Yeah, you should get getting bounce emails. I mean, the trick that I was talking about going into Seller Central is just trying to get a representative sample. So if you just pick the latest 100 messages, assuming that's a representative sample, that gives you a ballpark of what your bounce rate is. If you want to go through and pick, it starts on page number 1, go pick a random page number, pick page number 14 and 27 and see what your rate is across all those. Like, you're not going to know it exactly, but if you look at 2 or 3 pages and count them all up, you'll get a pretty good representative sample of what the opt-out rate is.
All right. So we're coming up on 40 minutes here. Last call for questions as far as that goes. So if you have any questions, go ahead and type those into the comments for us. But we'll take a couple last minute thoughts. Brandon, do you have any last thoughts before we field a couple final questions?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what we want to talk about is just like that we're right on top of all this. That, like I said, it's been a little bit detrimental, but not drastically so. Like the value of sending those emails is still like super valuable, and so I think what we'll see is, like I said, I kind of expect it to like get a lot of attention at first, and then 3 months from now it won't even really be an issue. It'll just be kind of a thing that's been there forever, and so I kind of expect it to stay fairly stable. I think we're adding a few more features, a few more like accounting things within the feedback genius realm to help pay attention to figuring out how to attribute those and how to account for them and providing some metrics around those. So we'll look for a few more features from Seller Labs that go around those lines. But and certainly pay attention to it. Again, I'd always encourage people to say, to like keep your messages relevant to the transaction, keep your messages like creative and interesting, so people don't try and identify them as spam or something that's useless. Try to add some value to that as well. All those things are going to help you out and help the system out as a whole.
Awesome. So we have a couple last questions here. Let's see.
I apologize. I see some of these messages coming in, but I only get like the first 40 characters of it, so I can't see what some of these people are saying.
Oh yeah, some of them are due to get cut off here with the program that we're using. Now here we go. So Miles asks, what's the reason that we add people to the global blacklist if they opt out of more than 3 sellers' messages? Is it because they're more likely to leave a bad feedback at that point?
I guess the logic behind that is if they've opted out to 3 separate sellers, then they're likely to opt out of yours as well. So we might as well just preempt that and avoid sending them a message to begin with.
Right, and so to that point, it's all about putting the customer first and letting them have a good experience. So, since we have the ability to see that they're not having a good experience with emails from other sellers, we want to put the odds best that we can. And I think that from the map pretty beforehand is a good way to go.
Yeah, I think you're breaking up there a little bit, Tyler. But the intent there, I guess, is trying not to like cheat or shortcut anything, but like we're just trying to enforce essentially what Amazon's trying to do as well, is cater to the buyer's best experience. So if they've identified themselves as somebody who's going to opt out of those things anyway, we don't have any better mechanism for doing it. Like with a buyer, we don't have direct access to that checkbox from any APIs or anything. So we're just kind of doing the best that we can to try and do what the consumer wants us to do anyway.
So that's being recorded. Yes, it will be available on our Facebook page and then the Facebook group as well. You can I can see it anytime. Christy asks, which email address do I send the emails to? Can you talk about that again?
Yeah, so you're breaking up quite a bit. I want to repeat. I think somebody asked if this was getting recorded. So yeah, whenever we use Facebook Live, Facebook automatically records it and posts it back on this Facebook page that we're on. Sometimes it takes them 5 or 10 minutes or something after the recording's over for it to show up, but the video replay of this will be there. You can share it with other people and everything. Make sure and get the word out about all this good information. The second question I think that I heard in there was, where do you find the email address to forward it to? So what you do with that is you log into your Feedback Genius account. Once you're logged in, you click on the little menu up in the top right, go down to Blacklist is one of the menu options there underneath it. And then when you're on the Blacklist page, there's a little question mark in the top right page, the top right of that corner. So I think it's a little black question mark. And when you click on that black question mark, there's an email address that shows up in there, and it says this is the email address you forward it to. And it looks something like blacklist-12345@emailparser.feedbackgenius.com. And so that 12345 number in there is tied to your account. And so when a message comes in, we know how to look up the order and everything based on where it came from. So that's how you find the email address. Again, go Feedback Genius, top right corner, click the button, click on Blacklist. And then on the Blacklist page, when it loads, there's a little black question mark up towards the top right of that. You click on that black question mark, and then that pops up a little box that has the email address on it. So that's how you find it. So that's hopefully gets people to figure out how to get that. Again, I think Tyler's posted that link to the blog post several places as well. The blog post mentions different instructions on how you do it for Gmail and I think a couple other mail clients, because the process is slightly different for each of those. So yeah, so I think that kind of covers all of it. I'm looking through the last comments that I can see here. Somebody said, 289 out of 1,042 messages. That's in that 26, 27% range. It's a little high, but probably in the ballpark for what we're seeing. Event for the office, and so I'm always cold and I have to wear a sweater. Anyway, so yeah, that's thanks for the questions on those. But I think that's kind of a pretty good overview for it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we should talk about. That kind of hits all the bullet points that I want to talk about. Did you want to cover anything else, Tyler?
No, I think that's it for me.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We appreciate you watching today. Again, feel free to share this. Join the Seller Labs Amazon Seller Group, too, for more discussions like this and other discussions just kind of between you and other sellers, where we can talk about these things. We have a pretty good following there now, so there's really great opportunity to learn from fellow sellers there as well. But I appreciate everybody paying attention today, and thank you.